So you want a stereo. New or used? Modern or vintage? Hi-fi, mid-fi, or lo-fi? Well, it depends. Depends on what? I'm talking today about the variables involved in building a hi-fi system. I'm particularly focused on building a budget system featuring vintage components. But the analysis is generally applicable and isn't even peculiar to hi-fi. Before I get into it, please subscribe, especially if this isn't the first time you've watched one of my videos. I'd like to reach 10,000 subscribers sooner than later. I put a lot of work into these videos, so it would be nice to have the channel grow, and getting more subscribers is the best way to do that. And ringing that little bell after you subscribe is the best way to make sure you're notified when I post new videos. With the introductory pleasantries out of the way, I'll get right to the point. The system you build depends on 4 variables: time, budget, effort, and flexibility. Increasing the value of any one of these variables will generally decrease the necessary values of the others. For example, if you have an unlimited budget, then everything else can be small. You can hire someone to assemble the system for you, and thus keep your time and effort small. You can be flexible on make and model, but have little flexibility on quality. You can demand the best. You can buy these $4 million speakers and hire my friend Nick to build you a single-ended triode amp with his reserve pair of engraved Western Electric 300B tubes, which go for over $10,000 each these days. Or maybe something more powerful, like this creation of his. In this video, I'll flesh out these variables and help you figure out your position in this 4-dimensional parameter space, and what that position means for the kind of system you can build. It is, for example, possible to build a great system featuring beautiful vintage gear for under $1,000. Great deals are out there. Let's dive in, break it down, mix some more metaphors, and consider the variables: time, budget, effort, and flexibility. This isn't a unique list and might not even be the best list, but it'll do. Time is how long you'll spend assembling your system and includes time before the first buy and after the last. Budget is how much you'll spend for your system and includes budget for purchase, repair, and restoration. Effort is how much work you'll put in to build your system and includes effort spent finding the gear you want and putting your components in satisfactory condition. Flexibility is how broad your requirements are and includes flexibility regarding aesthetics, sound quality, and condition. In general, each variable is inversely related to the rest. Given enough time and effort, you can demand great beauty and sound quality, i.e. limited flexibility, and achieve a great system for under $1,000, i.e. limited budget. You can even grow your budget if your initial flexibility is great, and you devote great time and effort to finding, restoring, and trying different gear and selling what you don't want to keep. How much time are you willing to take to get the system you want? Obviously, the longer you're willing to wait for that awesome piece of vintage gear to come along, the more the other variables can shrink. You can be pickier, go to few if any estate sales, and wait for that rare deal on awesome gear in good condition and at a low price. Great time doesn't necessarily imply great effort. Maybe you spend a long time shopping but restrict your efforts to checking Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. Maybe you spend some time doing your research and once you're ready to buy, you're one and done. That was my dad. Mac power amp and tuner, kit-built preamp, exotic turntable, state-of-the-art reel-to-reel, exotic speakers, and top-of-the-line Electro-Voice cabinets. Done in his early 40s, after which he spent his time collecting records. Maybe hi-fi is a hobby or obsession, and you're never done trying out new gear. Given the time you spend building your system, it does matter what you do during that time. You could be expending more or less effort, saving money, or spending your budget on whiskey. Taking more time doesn't necessarily mean expending more effort or building up your budget. But saving money and learning electronics, for example, do take time. All else being equal, the more time you spend, the more likely you are to find a good deal on the gear you want. How much are you willing and able to pay for your system? The bigger your budget, the more the other variables can shrink. With a big enough budget, you can go to a high-end hi-fi retailer, build the system of your dreams in a day, and have it professionally installed the next. In general, your budget includes not only purchase price, but also the cost of materials and supplies for repair and restoration, and gasoline and wear and tear on your vehicle. In general, the more limited your budget, the greater the other variables will need to be. Typically, your budget can grow with time. You can spend more money if you save or spread it out over a longer time. You can also grow your budget with time and effort, which can be devoted to gear you don't intend to keep. You can realize the value added through your effort by reselling the non-keeper gear for more than you paid initially and for materials and supplies, and thereby increase your budget. You can even start a YouTube channel, grow it, and eventually get it monetized. It'll take a lot of work to earn more than the cost of a decent supply of good whiskey, though. How much effort are you willing and able to expend to build your system? Effort can be both direct and indirect. Direct efforts include hunting for hi-fi gear and working to improve its condition. Indirect efforts include researching gear, learning skills, and accumulating materials and supplies. The more effort you can expend, the more the other variables can shrink. But doesn't greater effort require greater time? Well, great effort requires some time, but given the same budget and flexibility, prowling estate sales, auctions, and thrift stores, and haunting Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist will generally produce results more quickly than occasionally browsing Marketplace and Craigslist. At the small extreme of effort, you won't do any repairs yourself, and you might only visit resale shops specializing in vintage hi-fi. I'm talking about places like Echo Audio in Portland, Oregon, or Skylabs Audio in Des Moines, Iowa. I expect many of my viewers are familiar with Skylabs through their YouTube channel. If you aren't, then you should be. While this sort of resale shop may not provide an extended or any warranty on vintage gear, they are going to get their gear in good working and cosmetic condition before sale, and they'll generally provide service after the sale if and when something breaks. Their gear won't be cheap, nor should it be. You'll pay a premium for others to do the work of finding the gear and getting it ready for you to enjoy. Note that some shops, even those with technicians, may only work on gear in preparation for sale or only repair gear they've sold. On the large end of this effort variable, you will be that guy or gal who not only checks Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace continually, but also haunts every estate sale and auction within a 100-mile radius. In between estate sales and auctions, you're regularly popping into every thrift store within 50 miles. If you're not hunting for gear, you're repairing, restoring, and or building hi-fi gear and or accessories. Since your friends and family know how you spend all your free time, people will just bring you things, and friends and family will clue you into gear that someone might want to sell. Word may get out about you, and people will ask you to fix their gear. You also might find that a few people will simply bring you gear that they don't want anymore. Great effort expended towards shopping can allow you to be pickier, i.e., you won't need to be as flexible. In contrast, great effort expended toward repair and restoration can allow you greater flexibility. Non-working gear in rough condition is cheaper and easier to find, but will require effort and some money to repair and restore. If you're willing and able to devote the necessary effort, you won't need to spend much to repair and restore any one piece of hi-fi gear. Most resistors, capacitors, and transistors cost less, even much less, than $1. A few components, like big filter capacitors and power transistors, can cost more than $10 each. If you need to buy components that are unique to a model or line of models, you will pay a premium. Missing knobs might cost $20 each. A burned out power transformer, $100 or more. Compare these costs to the cost of labor. I charge $30 an hour because of my relative inexperience. Real professionals will charge $50 an hour or more. Inflation hits all of us. Most techs will charge a minimum or bench fee. If you lack technical skills, not to mention tools, then the labor you can devote to your gear will be limited. In general, if you're planning on building a vintage hi-fi system, you should be prepared for the day that one or more of your components requires technical work. With time and some money, you can build the capability to do that work yourself. If you can't do the work, then you should find one or more people who can. You need a guy to keep your system working. As I described in a recent video, almost anyone can, if they're willing, devote effort to improving the cosmetic condition of vintage gear. Fewer people have devoted the time to building the skills necessary to restore and repair electronics. Remember the materials and supplies I mentioned regarding your budget? Those include tools, electronic components, and hardware. Before making repairs, you need to order components, and before ordering those, you need to learn what to order. All of this takes time. Time not only for the effort of labor, but also for the effort of the learning necessary to make that labor productive. How much flexibility do you have in the hi-fi gear you'll buy? Are you flexible regarding age and aesthetics, or do you only want vintage or new gear? Are you flexible about quality, or do you only want top-of-the-line models from high-end brands? Are you flexible about condition, or does your gear need to be in perfect working condition and pristine cosmetic condition? With greater flexibility, the other variables will generally shrink. If you're super picky, then the other variables must grow to compensate. At the extreme of small flexibility, you may be determined to find a specific make and model with pristine cosmetics and working perfectly. If it's a relatively rare model, then acquiring it will require more time, money, and/or effort. If you must have a Pioneer SX1250, then your flexibility is small and the other variables will grow. If you'll consider any top-of-the-line receiver by Marantz, Sansui, or Pioneer, then your flexibility is a bit greater. You may still need to spend a lot, but it will take less time and effort to find it. If you're willing to try any pre-1980 integrated amp or receiver by Marantz, Sansui, Pioneer, Harman Kardon, Technics, Yamaha, Kenwood, Realistic, Rotel, or JVC, then your flexibility is much greater, but still limited to select brands during a particular time period. If you have the knowledge or simply the sense of adventure to try separates and more obscure brands, then your flexibility becomes so large that you're open to more deals that fewer others will consider. If you're also willing to sacrifice vintage aesthetics for high build quality, then you expand your deal space to brands like NAD and Adcom, which became known in the 80s for their high quality, reasonable prices, and plain appearance. If your flexibility is large enough to include AV receivers from the 2000s and later, and you're not even that concerned about build quality as long as the gear works, then you can quickly assemble a fine-sounding, but not great, system for a few $100s without much effort. Condition is the other major aspect of flexibility, but greater flexibility on condition requires greater effort, as well as some additional time and budget for materials and supplies. If you're determined to acquire one of a small number of models, then greater flexibility regarding condition will necessitate smaller increases in the other variables. Where do I sit in this four-dimensional parameter space in which some parameters are themselves multidimensional? My values of the time, flexibility, and effort variables approach the large extreme, with the caveat that my efforts towards shopping are modest. I suppose anyone who's into hi-fi enough to consider it a hobby or side hustle sits near the large extreme of time. Whether we shop far and wide or stick closer to home, we don't stop looking out for new gear, especially at a reasonable price. My flexibility regarding make and model have decreased over time, because I have a growing knowledge and awareness of my needs. Although, I'm of course really talking about wants. For example, given my recent acquisition of Dahlquist DQ10 speakers, which are relatively insensitive, that is, they need a lot of power if you're going to crank up the volume, I wouldn't consider replacing my Marantz 2252 with anything with less power, and I would eventually like to have something with much more power, say over 200 watts per channel. My flexibility regarding condition is large, in part because I'm willing and able to devote so much effort to improving the condition of anything I acquire. I like to sleep in on weekends, and I'm only looking for hi-fi gear, so auctions and estate sales don't appeal to me as much as they would if I were a habitually early riser and had other hobbies motivating me to hunt. My town doesn't have many thrift stores, and I'm not that into thrift stores anyway. Mainly then, I haunt Marketplace and Craigslist, and occasionally people give me stuff or alert me to private deals. My budget is small, but it's grown a bit because of all the time and labor I've devoted to building my skills, rehabilitating old and vintage gear, and selling my gear and services. The YouTube channel has contributed a bit as well. If you don't believe that large values of time, flexibility, and labor can make up for a small budget, or you're not sure we have the same definition of small, then please humor me and consider a couple of examples of systems I have in my home. I'll start with the system here in my home office. First is the Pioneer PL630 turntable. Pioneer sold these in 1978 and 79 for about $400. My dad and I bought mine in 1984, I think, and we got it used for $150, of which I paid $50. It was more than our $100 turntable budget, but the deal was too good to pass up, and I didn't even have to say please before Dad offered to pony up the extra $50. More recently, I've worked on it a couple of times and replaced a few internal components. The most expensive things I replaced were the rubber shoes for the suspension springs. I forget the exact cost of those, let's say $20. On the upper end, I'll say the other components I replaced might have cost as much as $10. A Riga Affida moving coil cartridge with stylus is mounted on the Pioneer's tone arm. Riga introduced the Affida in 2006, and it sold for $1,700. Since then, Riga has released Affidas 2 and 3. My friend Chris gave me my Affida and even set it up for me. It was a pretty cool thing, since it was the first time we met. I suppose he had it to spare, and it did move his Dynaco ST70 to the front of my repair queue. Hell, for a $1,700 cartridge, I'd have bumped whatever was on my bench at the time. I have an i5 Phono 2 phono preamp stage between turntable and control preamp. The iPhono 2 was introduced in 2016 and sold for $500. I didn't exactly pay anything for the i5, but it will register on my taxes as a $90 fee for service of Chris's ST70. So $90 it is. My other source in this system is a Rotel RCD 855 CD player. Rotel introduced the RCD 855 in 1989 for $400. I bought mine for $180, including shipping, on eBay 2 years ago, after I repaired and restored another of the same model for a friend. I was impressed with its internals and sound, and it features the classic TDA 1541A DAC chipset. I think the drawer was a bit sticky when I got it, so I boiled the belt. Boil the belt! And it's been fine since then. The CD player and phono stage are plugged into an Adcom GTP 500 Mark II preamp tuner. Introduced in 1988, Adcom sold it for $600. I got mine for free when I bought the matching power amp, the GFA 545 Mark II, and 3 pairs of ADS speakers. The GTP 500 didn't work, so when I mentioned that I worked on hi-fi gear, the seller threw it in with the deal. I drove a long way to get all that stuff, but I don't think you can even count the mileage when it was a free bonus. I did a full repair and restoration of the interior, and it works well, although I've never been able to get it to turn off, and I'm not sure the tuner works. Oh well, so it stays on all the time, and I don't listen to the radio anyway. The cost of interior components was relatively small, let's say $20, but it may have been less. I'm missing the remote control. Oh well again. I have a Heathkit AA40 stereo power amplifier. In 1961, Heathkit would have sold it as a kit for $80. I got mine for free, although it was in sorry shape at the time. A guy saw my listing for one of my Restomod tube amps, the BV6V6 I think, on Craigslist, and sent me an email offering to give me the Heathkit along with a pair of Dynaco Mark IIIs. They'd belonged to an ex-father-in-law, I think, and they weren't in working order, so when he saw my beautiful BV6V6 crafted from a Magnavox console amp on Craigslist, he figured I'd be a good person to pass the amps along to. It only had 2 good EL34 tubes out of the full complement of 4 EL34s and 2 6AN8s. But my friend and comrade Niels jumped at the chance to give me 4 matching EL34s. They were of questionable pedigree, but they registered as good and nearly identical to one another on the tester. I still need to buy a pair of 6AN8s, but NOS 6AN8s are cheap. A pair will run me about $12 plus shipping. We'll say $15. I borrowed the ones in the amp now from my Sansui 1000. I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors with new ones, the surgistor with a thermistor, the coupling caps with polypropylene MKP film caps, and some of the resistors with new ones. Those high voltage electrolytics can be a bit pricey, and the thermistor was special, so the components might have cost as much as $25. My speakers are the model L520 by Analog and Digital Systems, or ADS. ADS sold the L520s in 1980 for $380, although these, with the metal grills, came out a bit later. I bought these lovely sounding cult classic speakers from a guy in Riddle, Oregon for $140. At the same time, I bought 2 other pairs of ADS speakers and the Adcom GFA 545 Mark II, and picked up the GTP 500 Mark II for free. Mileage was substantial, but the whole lot was $520, so we'll just tack on $10 for the mileage and call these $150 speakers. I did replace a capacitor in each crossover, and those weren't exactly cheap. But I don't go for boutique capacitors, so maybe they could have cost as much as $5 each. I might add that earlier this year, I sold one of those pairs of ADS speakers, the ADS L730, for more than I paid for the whole lot. I have 3 pairs of DIY RCA interconnects. 50 meters of Mogami 2549 microphone cable cost me $120. The Viborg connectors list for $77 per set of 4, but I got them on sale for $42 per set. I'll roughly prorate the cable to estimate the cost of the interconnects at $50 a pair, and I made 3 pairs, so $150. Last and least is a substantial length of 12-gauge speaker wire. That was $20 from Amazon. So by very little money, I mean less than $750, with 50 of those dollars having been saved from my allowance in 1984. And can we really count that since the money was given to me by my parents and so long ago? I don't think so. Really then, the total is about $700. And relative to the other systems in my house, this one is not the cheapest. Okay, so the total doesn't account for every dime spent on this particular system. See, I did leave out the cost of the spray paint that I used to repaint the grills on the speakers. So maybe that bumps up the cost to an even $700. Stop bragging. I'm not bragging. Well, maybe a little. I'm just making the point that I've assembled a pretty damn good system here with mainly luck and my own labor, and the luck has come my way through my own labor and just putting myself out there, as we say, on Craigslist, Facebook, and YouTube. My friend Chris says my home office system is nice, but the living room system is great. How much did great cost me? The centerpiece is a Marantz 2252 stereo receiver. Marantz sold the 2252 in 1977 for $460. You're gonna hate me when I tell you how much I paid for mine. My son spotted it at the thrift store where he worked at the time. I got it for $200. I've replaced the lights, treated the pots and switches, and cleaned it up. I'm pretty sure I haven't replaced any electronic components except for lights. It sounds awesome and looks even better. One source is a Magnavox CDB582 CD player.
I want you to want me.
Magnavox sold this model for $250 in 1988. It has the same Philips mechanism and DAC chipset as the Rotel RCD855. I actually have 3 of them now, but the one in my living room was my first CD player. I bought it used at Q Audio in Cambridge, Mass. when I was in grad school. I think I paid $100 back in 1992. I remember that the Q Audio guy recommended it after I said that I still really liked the sound of vinyl. He said that people like to modify this model by putting in different op amps. A few years ago, I resto-modded it. I finally put in different op amps. So we'll tack on another $20 for parts. I need to boil the belt again. Boil the belt! The other source is a Raspberry Pi streamer with Allo DAC hat, 4 terabyte external hard drive, and DIY power supply. Chris says he prefers the sound of the streamer's DAC to that of the CD player. I've done a quick switch back and forth between the two while playing the same track, and the streamer's DAC has a noticeably warmer sound. The Pi streamer was $160 with shipping, the hard drive was $90, and the power supply cost me $30 in parts to build. The icing on the cake is a pair of Dahlquist DQ10 loudspeakers. The DQ10 sold for $400 in 1974. Again, don't hate me, but I bought mine as part of a larger deal that included the Phase Linear 200 and 2000 power amp and preamp, and Kenwood 2055 turntable. For the speakers alone, I paid $190. What about the cables? All the cables are just ones I had on hand, and I should probably upgrade all of them, but I haven't yet. I know, right? And, as with my Pioneer PL630, can we really count the $100 I spent back in 1992? So really, the total is more like $690. Phew! For a second there, I was worried that I might have spent something like real money on this system. I guess I really can afford to upgrade all the cables. This system does feature 2 of my luckiest finds, the Marantz and the Dahlquists. Are the deals I've gotten still likely or even possible today? Yes. Although nice restored receivers from the 70s are going for several hundred and even several $1,000s, a lot of nice gear is still reasonably priced. If you must have the gear that everyone else wants, then you'll have to pay a price reflecting that high demand. If you want it now without doing much hunting and can't or won't work on it, then you'll have to pay. However, if you're willing to be patient, put in some work, and consider gear that isn't in highest demand, you can put together a system with top-notch sound on a pretty tight budget. And if you're willing to be that guy who obsessively seeks out vintage and not quite vintage gear, and you're willing to try out gear and resell that gear when something better comes along, you might find yourself with a great system that didn't cost much. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave a comment, tell me about your great deals, how much time it's taken you, and are you done? Have a great day, everybody, and I'll talk to you later.